Empathy is a skill set, and it is the skill set of being able to recognize the perspective of someone else. So it's a very functional, rational ability. It's something you're born with, and it's something that as humans we need to survive. And because it's a skill set, the less you use it, the less practiced you become at it. This is a hard skill. It's hard to find, it's hard to master, and it has hard business results. I believe that listening is the backbone to all empathy, because if you don't listen, you can't understand. We tell each other to listen, but when do we teach each other to listen? Psychological safety and innovation are directly connected. When you have high levels of empathy, you have high levels of safety, innovation goes up, productivity goes up, performance goes up, motivation goes up, profit goes up by 23%.
Ever feel like your best decisions hit a wall when you step outside your comfort zone, especially when dealing with different cultures at work? Welcome to Upward Spiral, the podcast that believes intentional decisions are the engine for transformative personal growth across all areas of your life, from your well-being to your career. So if you're a professional navigating the global landscape, aiming for that next level of leadership, or simply wanting to connect more authentically with your colleagues worldwide, then this episode is specifically for you. I'm your host, Michelle O'Brien, and after spending over a decade immersed in the vibrant cultures of Asia, I've learned firsthand that understanding the different perspectives isn't just polite, it's powerful. And joining me today is someone who embodies this global understanding. Our guest is a bestselling author who's on a mission to reconnect 1 million people through empathy. She's been ranked as Malaysia's #1 workplace wellbeing leader and has trained tens of thousands of professionals globally in the art of human connection. From the bustling streets of Hong Kong to the serene landscapes of Sri Lanka, she's lived and breathed diverse cultures. With her infectious energy and profound insights, please now welcome the incredible Mimi Nicklin. Oh, I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you. That introduction was amazing. You know, every time I hear it, and yours was a special one, I sit and listen and think, did I do all of that? Of course I did, but it's amazing to hear it. So thank you for such a beautiful introduction.
Oh, and you know, I could have kept going. Honestly, I feel like that's just the tip of the iceberg of what you've achieved.
Well, it's nice to hear that from someone else. I think probably, certainly for me, but probably for all women, or many women, I should say. When you hear it from other people, it's a real, I don't know if it's a relief or just a confidence boost.
Yeah.
But when I hear you say, you know, all the things you've achieved, I think, did I? You know, did I already achieve that? So yeah, it's very exciting.
I think when you're in the thick of it, it's like you don't realize. And I did an exercise recently and just took a step back and had a look at what I'd achieved in the last kind of 12 to 18 months. And I was like, oh, okay, you know, because sometimes you don't lift your head out of it enough to really appreciate how far you've come.
And celebrate the small moments, Michelle. I think that's such an important piece. We run so fast. The world is so fast, right? Everything is fast life, fast food, fast grab, fast everything.
Yeah.
To actually stop and think, you know, I did that thing, or that's worth celebrating. And sometimes it's a really small thing.
Yeah.
I think we have to have real intention to do that, because otherwise, as you said, 18 months goes by, you don't even notice, you know?
It's a blink. And then sometimes you just feel like you're not getting there, you know? You have a vision and you maybe have a timeline and you're like, oh, I'm not getting there. But when you do poke your head out of the water, you realize how far you've come and you think, okay, you know, I am still on the right path.
Yeah, absolutely. Progress over perfection.
Absolutely. I love it. But today we are here to talk about cross-cultural empathy.
Yes.
And I'll maybe get into the reasons shortly as to why I want to cover this topic. Because as I can be sometimes on this podcast, a little bit selfish because I get these amazing guests and I'm like, oh, you can help me with this problem that I've got. But before that, I would just love to hear from you your definition of empathy.
Oh, yes. Empathy is fundamentally perspective taking. So we're talking about the ability to recognize or understand the reality or the opinion or the perspective of somebody else. So it's a skill that is really, really misunderstood, because a lot of people think maybe it's an emotion or it's sympathy or it's pity or compassion. But empathy is a skill set. And it is the skill set of being able to recognize the perspective of someone else. So it's a very functional, rational ability, which is actually built into the prefrontal cortex of your brain. So it's something you're born with, and it's something that as humans we need to survive.
Okay. Oh my God. Okay. There's quite a lot to unpack in here.
I should have done a quick one, shouldn't I? I should have just said perspective taking.
Yeah, I know. But then But you've almost made it sound physiological.
Well, it is. I mean, it's built into your brain. You're born. I mean, there's a very small percentage of the world that is born without this, and they tend to have some level of neuropathic differences in their brain, shall we say, different ways of thinking and approaching life. But for the majority of the human race, 98% of us, we are born with this because we're a pro-social species. So we need to connect to be able to survive.
Then why do so many of us struggle with it?
It's the $1 million question. The short answer is that empathy has two great enemies. One is low time and the other is high stress. And if you asked your audience, please put your hand up if you have low time and high stress, right? Exactly, right? Everybody is going to put their hand up. Yeah. So it's, as a skill set, you have to practice it, you have to use it, you have to be intentional about it. And often we just don't make or create the time to do that. And because it's a skill set, the less you use it, the less practiced you become at it. So when we actually started there at the beginning of this conversation, right, talking about speed and everything's so fast, to actually stop and understand somebody else needs you to stop and understand. So time and stress, I mean, I'm putting it simply, but those two are huge realities for, at least in the working world, why we don't see enough of it.
I will be completely honest. I think in my last corporate role was Disney, huge, big organization. We were under a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. We were launching Disney Plus. I was part of the team to launch Disney Plus across Southeast Asia, Hong Kong and Taiwan. And I always felt I had a lot of empathy for my colleagues. But after doing an episode with Joseph Cope on the podcast, I think I realized what I had was sympathy and compassion. You know, if someone was going through a hard time, I would have a lot of sympathy for that. I would have a lot of compassion. I would make a lot of allowances for that. I would often talk to my team across the region and, you know, try to draw as much as I could out of them. But the reality is, I didn't always take the time to really see and understand their perspectives.
I think, I mean, I hear it a huge amount. We are living through a deficit of empathy. So we have now lost 48% of this skill set in the last 3 decades. So the good news is you're not alone.
Okay. Yeah.
The bad news is there's too many of us that struggle with the same reality because we need it, right? We need to be connected. We need to belong. We need to feel seen and heard. It is just fundamental to every baby that is born.
Yeah.
So it's something I hear all the time. I think, again, particularly in the corporate world, because of the pressure, because of the time pressure, because of the goals and the KPIs and the objectives and the stress and the politics and all of those things. It's hard. It's really hard. I mean, I always say to people, this is a hard skill. It's hard to find, it's hard to master, and it has hard business results. But there is a rhetoric out there that will say this is a soft skill, which let's end today on your show, right?
Yeah.
It's not soft. This is a hard thing to work with. So I think your reality that you're describing puts you in the 90%.
Yeah. And I think you know, like you said, you're so busy. We're so stressed. I didn't always take the time. And then there's the cultural nuance and the cultural differences. So my Western colleagues at Disney, we were able to connect. We were a lot more open about how we were feeling, what we were doing, what we were thinking, thoughts on this project. Whereas maybe some of my more Eastern and Asian colleagues weren't so open because of that kind of those cultural nuances, those cultural differences. And, you know, there are only so many times that you can ask somebody to open up. And if they are unwilling to do so, it's very hard to get the information that you need in order to, practice empathy, I suppose. How can we do that?
Yeah, look, I think a couple of things come to my mind. The first thing that's interesting is, you know, when I listen to you, and if someone looked at us, right, given the color of our skin, they would think we come from the same culture, which of course we did, as in we were both born in the same country.
Yeah.
But it's funny when I listen to you, because I've been in Asia my entire career, 20 years, I feel the other way around. I find it far harder today, or let's say I have to work harder to understand Western organizational culture than I do Eastern, because I've been there so long. So the one thing that just came to mind is that culture is not necessarily something you're born into, but something that you can learn and adapt to. So for anyone who's listening, who's thinking, yes, like I totally resonate, totally empathize with what Michelle is saying, that's a real challenge. Time does solve that. Time and intention, right? Because You have to want to fix it.
Yeah.
If you sit in your bubble, you can't.
Step before that, you have to be aware of it. So,
True.
I think I've been in Asia 11 years, which is significant.
Yeah.
But I don't, until again, kind of earlier this year in my conversation with Joseph Cope, I wasn't aware. I don't think I was aware of that in order to then spend the time to work on it. You know?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I have a really simple model that I work with in the corporate world, and you're right. The first step is awareness. The second is intention, and the third is measurement. Because you're right, you absolutely have to be aware that you want to lean into those worlds. I would say the second thing, based on what you were saying just then, is you are right, particularly in Eastern Asian cultures, that desire to, as you phrased it, open up, to I was going to say overshare, but just to openly share is certainly less than you would find in the West. But that doesn't mean that you can't still have empathy for those people that aren't sharing, because you don't always have to form your empathy through verbal communication, right? So the more time you spend with a team, even if they're not telling you their personal realities, to be able to empathize with how they're working today, how they're clearly experiencing a meeting, how fast they're growing or not growing, how they're communicating or not, are all different forms of empathy that you can build your curiosity, fundamentally, your human data, right, around those people. So you may never understand them to a level that you would in the West. But again, that's not necessarily a barrier. It's just a cultural difference, right? So the empathy would be slightly different in that space. I remember when I first started working in Hong Kong, I was very young, maybe 23 or 24 or something. I was very young. And I had a team that was below me in terms of level. And I couldn't understand why they were sending me emails at close to midnight, right? I didn't know. And I didn't, to your point, I didn't know to ask. So I just sort of watched for a while. And then a few months later, I can't remember how long, probably 6 months, somebody told me over a coffee that they were going to continue to send me messages at nearly midnight until I told them it was okay to go home before then. And I had no idea. Yeah. And I was so young anyway, I was a young leader in that time. They were even younger, right?
Yeah.
But no one at that time had ever said, hey, Mimi, there is a hierarchical structure here. And simply by your job title, you need to instruct this team how you want them to behave. And of course, coming at that time from the West, it was my first work over here in Asia. I couldn't imagine that because you wouldn't have had to do that in London. I didn't have to tell someone when they could go home in a different culture. So there's all kinds of different ways to uncover that empathy. Fundamentally, it's about data, understanding how your team is experiencing the same thing that you are differently.
Okay, I love this because I think, I've always relied on, okay, what are they telling me? Yes, I will pick up on other cues, but okay, let's talk through these different cues.
Yeah.
What are they? What should we be looking out for?
So I think the first one is fundamental to their behavior. I think even if somebody doesn't tell you that they're unhappy or uncomfortable in an environment, if you are aware, if you have the intention to be interested, it's very easy to see, right? Mm-hmm. Because in the end, as human beings, we're all far more alike than we are different. It doesn't matter what language we speak or where we come from or what gender we are or any of those things, right? Mm-hmm. As humans, we experience things in very similar ways. Uncomfortable people are uncomfortable people, right? So I think that's the first thing. I think secondly, growth is something you can see. So if someone isn't growing, there will be a reason for it. Human behavior always has a reason. There's a reason that they're not getting promoted or growing into that role or being able to achieve what you hope for them to achieve. And I think that's a real nuance as well, because what I also learned in this journey is that as Westerners and from Western cultures, we want people to grow because we think that's what they should do. You should start as an exec and then you should become a manager and then you move to direct. Like there's a ladder and you should climb it. But often across these cultures, people don't necessarily want to climb that ladder, right? Mm-hmm. They're absolutely happy where they are. They may want to stay in that role for 25 years and you may never really understand why, right?
Yeah.
But you have to accept it. In that empathy, you have to understand for that person's reality, this is enough for them. And I think social structure has a huge role to play in that. A lot of my work is with women in the Gulf and South Asia, South and Southeast Asia, but predominantly South. So India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and then up the Gulf. In those countries, the social reality for women in the workplace has a long long way to go. I'm not talking about organizational acceptance or inclusion or diversity or any of those policies that we have in the workplace. Yeah. I'm talking about social structures. To be a woman in those families, in those structures today, you have a huge amount of responsibility outside of the organization that is not going to change in this generation or probably even the next. So for those women, whether they want to become a leader or not, that's a different discussion. Understanding them involves understanding societal context. You cannot understand that female leader if you don't understand the family she comes from, because they're completely intertwined. That idea of personal life and professional life being completely separate has no grounding. It never did. I think it was created by men, like in the 80s.
Yeah.
Right? It never existed, especially for women. There are no two halves of us, right? We are just us.
Yeah.
So I think that empathy, especially when you're looking across cultures, has to be wider than how are you doing in this role, on this job, on these emails, for you to be able to grow in that understanding of them. Does that make sense? I know it sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, and it does. It kind of comes back to that point where, like, you're so stressed, you've got so much to get done. And yeah, taking that time, and especially if you're working across the region, to understand that, the differences between Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, just like Southeast Asia alone is wild. How different these countries that are sitting next to each other are.
Yeah.
And then adding that layer on to look at the societal elements of your different employees. You might have like a woman who's in her early 20s versus a woman who's in her 30s and who's got children versus a woman who's older versus, men on the same path. That's a lot.
Yeah, it is. But I would say, Michelle, that a lot of that learning is not necessarily in the box that is called your job.
Yeah.
So, for example, I was in the Philippines. You just mentioned it, but I was in the Philippines with an organization recently doing some consulting work. And the boss of that team was Western. She was British. The whole team was Filipino, both of them, men and women. And one of the things she was asking me is, Mimi, why won't they talk to me? She's like, I know they like me. And I like them, but I cannot lead them. She'd been there about 6 months. And I asked her, I said, have you fed them? She was like, what do you mean? This is not like they're not like pets. I said, no, I'm joking. But have you given them a meal? She was like, no. I said, okay, get them lunch. Yeah. Just see what happens. So, I'm being a little fickle, but quite seriously, over the next few months, she built that into her relationship to make sure that she had opportunities to buy them lunch and they would sit around the table. Groups of them still didn't talk much, but 6 months later, now they're beginning to open up, right? They needed that cultural context of community, right? That's because how they have grown up, how they've established their culture is in groups. One-on-one wasn't working for them, right? So her taking them, she was thinking she was doing a good thing, taking Michelle for lunch and then taking somebody else for lunch. But all that happened is they just sit there very shyly looking at the structure and the hierarchy and saying yes, no, yes, no. She needed to look at how they had grown up, their own culture, where families gather around a table and groups share their food. It's not that dissimilar in Singapore. Malaysia's the same. Indonesia to a certain extent. Where these cultures are community-driven, high-context cultures, you don't necessarily have to learn that in your job.
Yeah.
You have to know that by living there.
Yeah.
Right? So sometimes it's just a matter of looking around at the country you're in, even if it's for a week, and referencing what do you see out of work that might be impacting what you're seeing in work.
Oh yeah, for sure. And the whole eating thing is, coming here, my first few months, like I ate lunch with the team and, but I just gained so much weight in my first 2 months because like my body just wasn't used to eating like, noodles and ramen and rice. And, it honestly got to the point where I was like, I cannot go on like this. So I'm just not going to fit in my clothes. So like I pulled back and started to kind of bring my own lunch and did what I used to do in the UK, which is kind of just like eat my little salad at my desk and work through lunch. But I noticed over time my professional relationships decline because I wasn't having that social time. I wasn't, taking that full hour lunch break, going and having a meal with everybody. And it's hard to come back from that as well.
It is. I think especially when you have some level of racial segregation, right? The Easterners know that the Westerners tend to do that, but they don't, right? So then they're going to leave you out.
Yeah.
Because they think, oh, that Western lady, she wants to eat her salad on her own, right? Which is true. We do that.
Yeah.
But then they're going to stop inviting you. So you're right. It's quite hard to come back from that. So you have to kind of find a balance, I think, of the culture, the local culture you're in.
Yeah.
And your own, sort of boundaries and the things that you love and being yourself, because you don't want to be fake.
Yes.
But you also want to connect.
Yeah.
So you have to have that kind of authentic middle ground.
Yeah, exactly. And I think from a lot of what you're saying, so much of it is observation. When you're working in, a new continent, a new country, is taking the time to really look around and observe and, understand culture as it is. Like, it's not necessarily part of the job and shouldn't be seen as part of the job. It's part of life of living in a foreign land.
And listening is such a huge part of that. I think what's really interesting as well is that whilst every country has its own unique culture and unique nuances and foods and cultures and languages and religions and all of those things, the more I travel, the more I realize we're all pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Right. So the way that we do things is different. The way that we communicate is different. But there are so many similarities between us. As you said, it's just about observing them and finding them. So I can often, for example, reference husbands with female leaders and the role of husbands or the role of men in our lives in a similar way in some countries in Asia, some countries in Africa, even some countries in Eastern Europe. The relationships are similar. The context is different, but the relationships are similar. But you're absolutely right. The only reason I know that is because I listen to them, right? So I have enough conversations to say, didn't I hear this in India, right? And then I'll hear it again. I think, okay, but now I'm in Oman. Yeah. Right? What is connecting? Well, women are connecting this, right? These relationships, these opinions. So listening is, it's a lot of what I guess I teach, but is probably, I don't know, our greatest superpower, to truly be able to listen with that intention of understanding versus replying, for example.
And it is that listening with intention.
Yeah. You're a podcast host. You're brilliant at it, right? You do it every time you record. But in life, you have to learn it. We tell each other to listen. But when do we teach each other to listen? So children, we do it all the time, right? If you have small children, you constantly say, listen to mummy, listen to daddy, listen to auntie, listen to teacher, right? All the time.
Please, for God's sake, just listen to me.
But then they grow up and we stop. We don't teach our kids in high school, in university. We're certainly not teaching it in the workplace. And yet it is probably the foundation to every relationship we have. So I think it's having a bit of a renaissance now. When I think of my own work, I can see it. Certainly people are sort of putting more prominence and relevance around this idea of empathy, of listening, of curiosity. But we certainly went through about 15 years there where nobody cared.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes it feels a little bit like that now as well. So with some of the changes that are happening in the world. So if you're a leader and you want to hone your skill of empathy, what are the things that we need to do? So
fundamentally, it does all come back to listening. I believe that listening is the backbone to all empathy, because if you don't listen, you can't understand. It's the same when people ask me about inclusion in the workplace. You can't include someone if you don't understand them. Or psychological safety. How do you create safe spaces if you don't know what safe means to them, right? Yeah. So all empathy comes from listening. But in terms of how to do that, like if you, I don't know, put some tips on the table, right?
Yeah.
The first I would say is around eye contact. We are very poor at it and we're getting poorer at it. And that is because of our screens, because of our cell phones, right? It is far easier to avoid eye contact than it is to make it. And when you make it, amazing things happen, but you have to hold it a little bit, right? So you'll be amazed if you look back at all your podcast episodes. It would be really interesting to look at how many of your guests actually held your eye, because it's quite tiring actually for me to really look at you for what is like, I guess, an hour we're going to talk, however long we talk. It's a focus. You have to really, pay attention. So the advice I always give people is to try and remember the color of the eyes of the person you're looking at, because what that will do is consciously, it will say her eyes like a green or blue color. In that second, it's taken me to consciously learn something. Subconsciously, the other person has felt connection. So it's a phenomenal way to do it all the time, especially if you're at big events or networking or that type of thing. So the first thing is eye contact. The second thing is to use people's names. I think that our names are the first gift we were ever given, right? When you were born. People respond amazingly to their names. Yeah. That is why the service sector is full of people with name badges that nobody is using. Except me. I don't know. Like, I'm sure some people are.
Yeah.
But use people's names. And again, if you watch this back, you'll see that I've used your name often. I'll say, Michelle, that is so interesting. Or Michelle, thank you for... Because subconsciously, it's creating connection.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, I'm interested in you. I want to be here. Thank you for asking me. I'm trying to create inclusion between us, right?
Yeah.
So using people's names, so simple, right? And so powerful. How often you hear people say, oh, when people say my name, I think of my mum shouting at me. That is literally how little we're using people's names that we associate it with when we were in trouble as a child, right? Yeah. So I'd say that's the second one. And then the third one is probably around body language and just making sure that you're conscious of being open, which of course, going back to culture, is slightly different in different cultures. But having open shoulders, leaning in, not uncomfortably, but being open, rounding your shoulders, showing your palms. So again, ta-da! Yeah. But if you watch it back, you'll see that a couple of times I've done that in this conversation. I don't know, self-trained in it now.
Yeah.
But how you use some of those signals shows to people, I want to listen. If I sit here like this, immediately, right? The energy shifts at the table literally in a second. You laugh, but it's true. All I did was cross my arms and slouch a bit.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're like, oh, I don't really like
she wants to be.
Yeah, she's done. She wants to go, right? So our bodies are so important. And it's not a science. It's just an awareness to showing people that you're interested in them.
Yeah. Oh, I love these. Okay. Eyes, names, bodies. Yeah. Or hands. Yeah. Jazz hands. Yeah. I think all of those are amazing. And what about when it comes to like asking people, like a question's important or, you know, okay, we've spoken about other cues, but can you question people or can that come across sometimes as maybe a bit much?
No, I think questions are critical, but how you ask them is important. So why is probably one of our most powerful super skills when it comes to being empathetic, right? Because if I don't ask why, I don't know why, right? I have to ask. But of course, there's a big difference between saying, why do you think that happened? And why? Why did that happen? Michelle, why? Why didn't you? Immediately, you're like, I don't know, Mimi. I don't know what happened, right? Versus saying, tell me why. Yeah. Why do you think she did that? Right? Immediately you're like, oh, I don't know. Let's talk about it. Right? Yeah. So how you ask those questions is so important. And the words in those questions is also quite important. So why is a great word.
Yeah.
But how is also a really good word. So sometimes when we use the word why, it can be a little bit on the offensive, right? Attacking why. Why did you do that? Why are you late? Why didn't you? A lot of whys, right? And you're like, if you shift that same question to use the word how, it totally reframes it. So if I said to you, why did we not meet Q2 numbers? Why, Michelle? Why did we not meet them? But you see, versus Michelle, how is it we didn't meet the Q2 numbers?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. How is it that we missed the deadline? How is it that this client doesn't want to renew the contract versus why? Why don't they want to renew the contract? Okay. So sometimes it's just about the questions you use. And the great thing about that is it's based on neurolinguistics. So you can literally write down a list of questions and put them in your phone or on your desk or wherever they are and just use them over and over and over and over again. Doesn't matter what language, it doesn't matter what context. Yeah. Once you learn that structure, you can use it all the time. And people respond so differently. Even how are you, for example, right?
Yeah.
How often in your life you go, hi, how are you? I'm fine, thanks. How are you? That is not a conversation, right? That is just like a moment in time.
Yeah.
Next time you get a coffee or a tea at the coffee shop, right? And the person asks you, hi, how are you? Stop and say, I'm fine, thank you. How are you? And stop. You'll see they'll look up and they'll go, okay, I'm actually okay, thank you. You say, you having a good day? And they might look around. They're like, yeah. Just after that, just after that awkward second when they're like, are you talking to me? Everything changes.
Yeah.
So even when you're asking someone, how are you? The way you ask, the intention you put into it can totally change a conversation.
Yeah. I'm smiling because it's like, there's also that kind of north-south divide in England as well. Like I'm from Manchester moving down to London. I used to in Manchester. You walk past people on the street, and you're like, "You're right." You're right. And it's just a way of saying like, hi, it's like a head nod. It's like, hello, whatever. But even moving down to London, I come into the office in the morning and I'd be like, all right, you're right. And at one point I got feedback from like my manager, and they were like, people like are talking about, you keep saying you're all right. People think that you're thinking something's wrong, or like that, people are getting offended. And I was like, no, I was just saying hello, But even that kind of act of friendliness was like just misinterpreted of me being like, you're right. I don't know. It was really alien.
I really hope, Michelle, that today, which I'm guessing given you've been here 11 years, is 11 years later, at least, that has changed and that there's more awareness, because behind that feedback from that manager is so much bias, right? Like, listening to you, it makes me irritated.
Yeah.
Like that anybody would take aside a young, positive, optimistic, open, whatever role you were doing at the time, and say, there's feedback here that people don't understand you and why. No, I'm sorry. Like, why are you critiquing the way I welcome people into my morning, Yeah. So I really hope that's changed, because it's really sad.
I know. It was a real culture shock going from like Manchester to London, because in Manchester you'll sit on the bus and you'll have a chat like with total strangers. You'll get on the tram to go into the city centre, and maybe it's changed a little bit now with headphones, but you kind of get on the bus and people would say morning to each other. Sometimes you'd sit next to somebody and they'd want to have a chat, and it was always so nice. But I grew up with that, so I thought that was normal. And then moved to London. First couple of days on the tube, I'd get on the tube and I'd be like, hi, morning, and people would look at me like I was like an alien or just some crazy person. And I was like, God, this is really cold. And people are, nobody talks to each other.
God forbid we talk to each other. That is probably, at the very beginning I said to you, I find it very hard to work in Western cultures. It's partly that. Right, but we don't do that here. What do you mean we don't do that here? Right? I want to say good morning, But I think it's spreading that head down, don't communicate thing, and that makes me really sad. But the great thing is, if you break it, so you need to go back to your roots now, Michelle. You need to start doing it around Singapore, right? Because when you do break it, people are so joyful. So yesterday I was walking my dog. He's this like big English bulldog. So he's a little bit intimidating for people in Malaysia, I think. There's very few dogs like him in the country. And this lady walked past me. And to be honest, if you looked at her, if you had taken a photo and like still frame, you'd think she's miserable as anything, right? She's looking down. She's not interested in who's walking past her. She's definitely not saying good morning. She's in her world, and she's not a very positive energy. And I can see her coming towards me. And as she gets, 3 meters away or something, I say, morning. She looks up and beams at me.
Yeah.
She's a bit surprised. And then she says, morning. And she carries on. So when you break it, but you have to be the one to break it, because other people won't. And otherwise it will just keep multiplying. This silent world. I was in the airport this morning to come here. Granted, it was like 4 a.m. But I walked past Costa Coffee in Kuala Lumpur airport, and there was probably 15 people in there. Not one of them was talking to anybody else. The entire coffee shop was on their phones. Where is the humanity? Yeah. Guys, you can't live like this. What is so interesting in Instagram? I love Instagram, but what is so interesting that you can't talk to your husband, wife, sister, brother, daughter, whoever's sitting at the table with you entirely for an entire coffee shop, an entire silent coffee shop? I thought I should take a photo. I didn't, but I should have.
Yeah. And we've been talking a lot about empathy in leadership, but there's empathy in life, right? Like,
people need it. People need it. And I just really want your listeners to think about how they can be part of the change. Yeah. Because otherwise you're going to become part of the sea of disconnection. You're going to do it too. And as you said earlier, we need awareness, which hopefully this conversation is, and then you need a bit of intention, right? I love Instagram. I can happily sit and look at my phone, right? But that's not the point. If I do that, I'm choosing to engage with a whole lot of people I probably will never meet in my entire life. versus the person that's right here with me now. I'm not saying we should never go on Instagram. I'm just saying that if we allow ourselves to get into a rhythm where we live alone when we're together, loneliness is just 10% step away. And we already have 52% of the planet stating they are lonely.
Yeah.
It's a huge problem, right? Loneliness kills us, quite literally kills us. It's the highest burden on our healthcare system today.
Yeah.
So anyway, we've kind of gone from, you're right, to changing the world, right? But it's such an important skill, I think.
You know, I really wanted to talk about cross-cultural empathy because I want to get better. You know, I want, and I, you know, I'm going to announce a new role soon. Hopefully by the time this podcast is up, it'll be announced. But for the last kind of 10 months, I've been working in biotech, and we are going to be launching an incredible new product that is very literally going to change the world. The launch market is the US. You know, I've spent 11 years in Asia. Before that, I was working in the UK. Yes, I have worked on some global brands, but now going to a whole new continent to launch this product. I've got team members all over the US working on this project. And again, remote as well, adds another layer to connection. Like I want to practice empathy. I want to hone my skill of empathy. But again, it's a completely new culture.
Yes.
Any advice for me?
I would say default to shared humanity. And what I mean by that is, however different the cultures are, and for sure, American corporate culture is very different from Asian corporate culture. I also now have teams across the US, and I'm very conscious of that, right? How they want to greet each other, how they want to run meetings, even email communication, right? It's very differently structured. But what isn't different is the things that make us the same, right? So the reason I say that is smiling, for example. You can go to endless American meetings where basically nobody smiles. They're very serious, very serious meeting focus, right? They love an agenda, the Americans.
Professional.
Yes, right? But if you smile, and eye contact we spoke about earlier, but if you smile and make eye contact, they will smile and make eye contact back. Maybe not in the first 1 second, right? Yeah. Because we're all humans, right? And again, that is pro-evolutionary. It's literally built into the back of your brain, into your subconscious. So when you're feeling slightly out of place in a culture, the best thing to do is to default to the most simple things that make us all human. We all want the same things, right? To be loved, to be accepted, to belong, to grow, to succeed, to perform. Those things never change. Doesn't matter where you come from, any of those things. So default to those. And the second thing I would say is never be afraid to say what you sense in the room. So if someone is very cold or distant or seems disinterested, ask them, right? You have to be a little bit brave. But say, listen, Michelle, I'm sensing perhaps you're not enjoying this conversation, or you might not have time today. Would you rather I rescheduled? And Michelle will either say, do you know what? Yes, I'm sorry, but I really can't focus on this. Can we do this tomorrow? Or she's going to say, oh, no, sorry. She's probably going to sit up a bit, even on the screen. She's going to re-engage, and she's going to go, sorry, carry on.
Yeah.
Right? You have to, when you name things, they shrink. If you don't understand what's going on, mention it. And the last piece of that is just ask.
Yeah.
If you don't understand what's going on in this communication, just ask them and say, hey, I'm not sure I've entirely understood what we've agreed to here. Could you just summarize for me to make sure that I have understood exactly what you want from me in this meeting?
Yeah.
Right? Some form of question. It enables them to gift you back information. I call that confirming and correcting. It means for you, you're able to either confirm, okay, I did understand what they want, or correct it and say, I knew I didn't get it.
Yeah.
Because I thought what he was going to say is this, but he actually said that. So just, you have to be a little bit confident, but in that confidence, you revert to humanity. You revert to the things that are at our baseline.
Yeah.
And that tends to unite everyone. You know, I get the most amazing opportunity to work with, I'm sure so do you, especially in biotech, phenomenally powerful, interesting, famous sometimes people. And everybody just walks around them like they're puppets. I never do. I always talk to them just like normal humans.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how quickly you can see relief.
Yeah.
Right? Because you just speak to them normally. If you don't understand, ask them, have a conversation. And it breaks all those barriers.
I love that. I did just want to come back to one point, and that's if you can sense something's off with like an individual, you wouldn't, I don't know, maybe in Asia, I wouldn't necessarily call that individual out if we were in a group meeting, by saying, okay, you maybe look like, I don't know, whatever you're sensing. Because I know that could make even not even just people in Asia, like it could make someone feel quite uncomfortable for that to be called out in a group setting. Would you handle that afterwards?
I think it depends on the group setting, because I probably would.
Would you?
I probably would. But of course I would do that with, as you said, with social dissonance, right? So if I felt, this is going to make him, I say him because in my mind, in my imaginary vision of your story, then it was a man. But if I thought it was going to make him feel very uncomfortable or it was inappropriate, of course I wouldn't do it. But as a rule, I would just do it in a very open, charming way. Yeah. And just say, I would really like to understand your point earlier about this thing.
Yeah.
Could you explain it to me one more time? Yeah. Because whatever cultures, I mean, even if you think of a very formal culture like Japanese culture, right, which has a lot of hierarchy and a lot of structure in a meeting, there's a lot of ways to do things. Even when I've worked with the Japanese, that wouldn't be a problem. If I looked at the boss in the room and I addressed him properly with his title and asked him to please repeat this one key point so that I can be sure that I have understood you and can follow your instruction, he's going to say, sure.
Yeah.
Right. So I think as long as you are conscious, again, it goes back to social context, and you're not doing it with attitude or bolshiness or expectation. At least in my experience, very rarely do people push back against that.
Yeah. This is just such incredible advice. I'm so grateful.
So I hope it is.
So grateful to have you here. And I think, like I said, I did an episode with Joseph Cope a few months back, and it's really been something that I'm now becoming much more aware of, something that I want to work on. I really want to hone my skill of empathy, because I do believe it's a skill.
It's a skill.
And then, and I want to, hopefully I want it to then hopefully have a better impact on my decision making. So let's talk a little bit about kind of decision making and how empathy can impact that. So my understanding is that if I can get as many different perspectives as possible, it's going to inform my decision making positively, right? So I don't really know where I'm going with this. I'm kind of because I just want to bring it back to
can you make better decisions if you have higher levels of empathy?
Yeah.
See, that's my
there
empathy,
you go.
right?
Yeah.
Yes, I think you can, because I think, as I said at the very beginning, data, your human data comes from that empathy. So any decision that you're going to make, if you are able to inquire, if you are using curiosity, you're going to make a more informed decision. Sometimes that's very rational. It's like, I have asked 100 people whether we should change the water cooler, right? And you have data because you've asked them, they're giving you an answer, right? Very rational, functional insight.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's far more emotional. You may have, particularly again, we were talking earlier about high context cultures, Asian cultures, African cultures, the Gulf often. There may be a decision that's been made, but you have a sense they didn't really want to make it. They've said they did.
Yeah.
They said yes. But you also just feel like, I'm not really sure they really want me to do that, even though they've told me that they do. In that case, that inquiry, that second conversation, that curiosity, that empathy is going to improve your decision making. Because based on the evidence on the table and the 10 yeses, you are going to go and make this change. But you just know, I'm not sure they really want this change. You could go and do it. The data says do it.
Yeah.
But that empathy for others is telling you, I think I need a little bit more information. As I said, this is a hard skill, right? When businesses get it right, they see all kinds of business indicators going up, including decision making. Innovation, for example, improves by 48%. Innovation is just a really fancy word for changing stuff, right? Which is decisions. Yeah. I'm deciding to turn my blonde shampoo to brunette shampoo, right? Yeah. We call it innovation, but it's just a change. It's an evolution, right? That is a decision. It's a decision to do that.
But often people need to feel really comfortable and really safe in order to innovate.
They do. Yes. I mean, psychological safety and innovation are directly connected. So when you have higher levels of safety, people feel they're able to communicate, push back, critique, feedback, all of those things. Yeah. Innovation will improve. So yes, when you have high levels of empathy, you have higher levels of safety, innovation goes up, productivity goes up, performance goes up, motivation goes up, profit goes up by 23%.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, decisions that are based on data are always going to be better. So people always ask me, Michelle, can I run out of empathy? Or can I have too much empathy, right? And I always say to them, no, can you think of a single decision where too much information is not going to improve that decision, right? The FBI are one of the most sort of, I guess, well-known organizations that talk about using empathy in decision-making. They have something called the behavioral change stairway, which is a methodology that they use in hostage negotiations. So really tough decision-making, right? Because there's a person at a bank with a gun and hostages. Every decision matters. The shift to behavioral change, i.e. get the hostage taker out the bank and the people safely out, is based on this behavioral change stairway. The first step is to listen. The second is to empathize. At the very beginning of the toughest environments in the world, you have organizations like the FBI, like the army, who train their teams in empathy before they go into war. It's mandatory because they have to make decisions, right? In a war zone with human beings. Obviously, they don't always make the right decision. But that skill of being able to empathize is being trained into these people before they go into the most tough decision-making environments in their lives.
This is amazing.
That was a long answer. No. Yes, you need empathy to make good decisions.
But it's also like, empathy within the organization to make organizational decisions, but empathy for your customer and understanding all of your different customer cohorts, and not just understanding like their needs and wants, but understanding more deeply kind of their problems and having empathy for those different situations so you can potentially sell to them better.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. I mean, if you Google empathy in sales, you'll find loads of content, right? Because fundamentally, the best salespeople are the best empathizers.
Yeah.
Right? They're the ones that know how to listen.
Ones that truly know their perspective and therefore their needs.
And they can change their pitch to match them, right? So you think of a real estate agent, right? And someone who's not good at this will go in and say, this is the house. Do you want it? Yeah. Well, it's got a garden. Do you want it or not? Versus someone who goes in and says, this is what I'm looking for. And they say, well, actually, I've got a house for you.
Yeah.
Right. They're able to shift. They're able to be flexible to shift their sales pitch to what their customer is looking for. And that would be the same if it's FMCG products or a service or banking, right?
Yeah.
And what we see is that the more luxury the product or service, the more you need empathy to be able to sell it, right? The higher the quality, the deeper the decision-making process, and therefore the higher levels of empathy you need, right? If you're going to join a membership club for $100,000 a year, you're going to expect more understanding than if you join Fitness First for $13 a month. Right?
Yeah.
So definitely there's all kinds of levels of sales and empathy and customer understanding.
Yeah.
But it's fundamental.
This has been amazing because you've helped me get a better understanding of like cross-cultural empathy, like how I can be better with working with teams across this region, but also, moving over to the US. But also like how empathy can help me drive business decisions, not just organizationally, but with my customers and potentially drive sales as well.
And with your children. We didn't talk about that today, but even if you look with your relationships, right? Your personal relationships, your romantic relationships, your parental relationships, both your own parents or children if you have them, all of those relationships fundamentally shift when you have this listening-led mindset, when you want to understand before you reply. So we could probably stay for like another 3 podcasts.
I was about to say, like, we could save that for another podcast because that is just, honestly, like, that's a beast in itself. Very hard sometimes to have empathy for your children when, and which what you try, right? But when they're running you ragged.
But that's where we started, right? Progress over perfection. I think that I always tell the people I work with, not to ever aim for perfection because the gap between expectation and reality is disappointment. Yeah. So if you are aiming for perfection, I mean, we're never going to get there because none of us are perfect. You will be perpetually disappointed. Yeah. So don't aim for it.
Yeah.
Right? Shift your mindset, shift your goals, like you'll move, hopefully into the USA and your new role, right? Shift your expectations. You're not going to be perfect at understanding a totally new culture and meeting one.
Yeah.
But as those meetings roll out, your progress, your relationships, your ability to build trust and safety and all the things we've spoken about will incrementally improve.
Yeah.
And for me, in the end, Michelle, that's the story of life.
Sorry, I do have like one last question. I'm in startup world at the moment, it's a busy. So, how can we make empathy our superpower without affecting productivity?
The reality is your empathy will drive your productivity. because, and all the data shows us that. It's not just me. It's not like Mimi's magic formula, right? If you can build relationships, if you can build trust, whether that's with your team in your startup, or probably, I'm making an assumption, but all the people working outside of the startup, right? Because normally as startups, we have freelancers and, contractors and just people helping us. To the clients, to your investors, perhaps, to the people building you. I think you mentioned biotech, right? So the people that are investing into that science and the product, right? Your ability to build those relationships, to understand them and get them to understand you, is actually your fast track to productivity. You are going to get there faster, right? Okay. So the actual micro moment of, let me just take a minute, I want to really understand this, may take you, incrementally, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 8 minutes. But in the long term, even the medium term, you are cutting down time because you are reducing conflict, you're reducing misunderstanding, you're building trust, you're building relationships, all the things we've spoken about already. Yeah. So I think it's a mindset shift. I don't think it's about whether, do I have time for my empathy? But it's probably more about, can I be productive without it? Yeah. Right? So shifting how you see that. And you can call me in a year and tell me if it worked.
Okay, I will do. That's fascinating because, in the past it's felt a bit like another thing to add onto the list. Yeah. But I think that's, again, maybe it's just not coming as naturally to many of us,
for sure,
as it once did.
Yeah.
You
just need to practice.
Ago.
Practice creates permanence.
I love that. Oh, you followed these amazing sayings. Mimi, thank you so much for coming in and talking to me today. This has been such a useful and fascinating conversation for me, and something that's really high on my list as a skill that I want to hone. I want to get better, both in my role as a podcast host and as a mum as well.
Well, I think the fact that you had the conversation means you're already well on the way. So thank you.
I hope so. And then to everyone listening, I am going to link to all of Mimi's channels below. You can check everything out. Please reach out to her. If you've got any comments or questions, please drop them in and we'll respond. And then we'll see you again next week. Bye.